Welcome to the University of the Highlands and Islands, and of course welcome here to Inverness, to UHI Inverness. I'm Professor Chris O'Neill. I'm the principal and the chief exec here at Inverness, and I'm also Professor of Design and Innovation. You'll hear a lot of us boasting about being professors, or bragging about it, being professors, but in the most gentle way, of course. I've got to tell you, there are no fire alarms scheduled, so if you hear it, leg it, but do it in a very orderly manner, please. So back down the stairs to the foyer and out into the car park, or if we can't go that way, I'll take you down the stairs that are immediately opposite, and we'll do the same. Before we get into the evening, I just want to mention a few things about why this evening is such a significant and special event, not just personally, but for us as an institution. I want to say personally, obviously that's in reference to Professor Johnson, and not to us. This is entry into the professoriate is a very, very significant moment in any academic's career. It's a recognition that the work that the individual has been engaged with is at the highest possible national and international level. It's the highest attainment that an academic can hope to achieve. So just to put this into a context. For Vicky, obviously, it's very significant, and it's great to welcome her and members of the family here along to celebrate that. But for us at the institution, it's also very, very significant. Just to give this some context, just over a week ago, we had Princess Anne visit us by helicopter. Princess Anne is our Chancellor. She landed in a purple helicopter. Who knew there was such a thing? In the field just across the way. And she came across to open our Centre for Health Studies, which is a UHI initiative that's been supported by a number of public bodies. And we also had Professor Sir Jonathan Van Tam, who's been advising us and supporting us in developing the centre. And he said some really interesting things, and I'll try to tie this together in a few minutes, but one of the world's most eminent virologists is not just a UHI Inverness student. He's doing one of our online programs, which is superb, and I think an advert for you all. He's really interested in the flexibility and the agility and the breadth of experience and insight and expertise that's in what is actually a very small institution. We're not a big university, but we can turn on a sixpence. And this was one of the things that he spoke about, was that agility and that ability to engage with a number of different problems that we collectively as a community and as a society have to solve. So what's a virologist got to do with this evening? Well, of course, Vicky's going to be talking later on about the work that she did in terms of supporting, and her team, in terms of supporting the Highlands to recover from the impact of COVID. And of course, Sir Jonathan was a world leader in terms of a national and international response to COVID. So we might be small, but we are mighty and we're flexible. And that's very, very important, I think. So Vicky's elevation to the professoriate does extend that ability. It also gives us additional reach, which is really important. Now, I know that there are an enormous number of people online, and in order to demonstrate that reach, I think that's just the first four there. Both online and in person, we've got representatives of the World Bank, the European Sociological Association, ActionAid, the Gracia Michel Trust, a whole bunch of universities and other organisations who are plugged in to what it is that we're doing. And first of all, you're most welcome. And we're delighted that literally every corner of this world is in some shape or form being represented. So you're all most welcome. I also want to welcome the people that have come up from Hove, which there you go, Hove. yeah, the known centre of the universe. I think we'll all agree. And I reflect on both because that's where I actually first met Vicky as a friend before she became a colleague. So on that basis alone, I'm so pleased that you're here. And I'm so pleased now to hand over to Professor Johnson for her professorial address.
Thank you and welcome. I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes and I am so delighted that you're all here. So welcome to everyone and those online from Australia getting up so early, thank you. Right over to the States, and it's really incredible to be here. So first of all, I just wanted to say that a good friend and colleague, David Oswell, said to me at the European Sociological Association that we held here in Inverness the midterm for the childhood stream. He said, time is not always linear. And my journey is certainly not linear. Up and down, mountainous, bumpy, smooth. And actually, in my theoretical contribution, my changescape, you'll see that the timeline gets less and less linear, and we look at the circle of life. So just to, first of all, thank Chris O'Neill for highlighting this opportunity, also to Michael Rayner and to Melanie Smith for interviewing me and welcoming me, Neil Simcoe, Donna Heddle, for leading research with others across the partnership. It is such an inspiring place to be, an inspiring environment, but also an incredible university, very small and one of the newest universities, but really an incredible place to work. We've developed the Centre for Living Sustainability since I arrived in 2020. 6 days after I arrived, we locked down. So actually, it's only recently that I've met a lot of my colleagues here at UHI, and it's a delight to be here. At the Centre for Living Sustainability, we cover a lot of social sciences and arts and humanities. We work with partners across UHI, from Shetland, Orkney, down to Perth, across to the Outer Hebrides. And we work with our own Institute for Biodiversity and Freshwater Conservation, led by Bernd Hanfling. And there we have a whole theme called Nature and People. So I'm delighted to have ended up here. So being and becoming, what do I mean by that? I've actually borrowed the phrase from Lee in childhood studies, because young people are not just becoming adults, they're actually beings in their own right, human beings, here and now, in the present, that need to be heard and have a different perspective. Indeed, actually, we are all in transition and experiencing uncertainty all the time. We need to experience our changing political and cultural contexts, our changing relationships, our different feelings about ourselves and others and our place in the world. So why did I start this journey to become a professor? Well, I didn't. I was too busy being an environmentalist and an advocate for 20 years before I entered academia. And so I really feel this term being is becoming, we're in a continual state of change. And we must also, while appreciating the present, look forwards to the future and all travel a journey together. Welcome. So another theme here, revisiting, remembering, rebuilding. So some of these issues, the climate emergency, biodiversity emergency, the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, they're not new. So even when I was studying as a geographer at Sussex, then at Imperial Environmental Policy, we were talking about greenhouse gases then. And we were basically talking about sustainable development. In 1992, as part of ActionAid, I was on the official British delegation to the Earth Summit in Rio. There we lobbied on primary environmental care, indigenous and local environmental knowledge, on population dynamics, women's rights. And these issues have come back round again. They used to be called Agenda 21. The conventions on biodiversity and climate were being set up. And now suddenly we've rediscovered them. But in the last 30 years, perhaps we've gone backwards. So I would suggest we need to revisit, remember, and rebuild. And we need to not forget what was happening in the late 80s, through the 90s and 2000s. I want to pay tribute at this point to some of the people that I was working with there. The International Institute of Environment and Development, professors like Robert Chambers, who were working on participatory development and is still supporting our work to this day. So that's one strand of my talk, is the sustainability strand. The other strand is about child and youth rights. And indeed, at the Earth Summit, someone said to me, as we were lobbying with all the international NGOs and governments globally, someone said next they'll be asking children. And I thought that's a great idea. Let's do that. So in 1992, from ActionAid, I led my first ESRC, at the time ODA, 3-year piece of research leading to listening to smaller voices. I'm delighted to say that Edda and Joe are here in the audience in time for this. And Pashupati Sapkota, Biman Fernyol, different people from ActionAid we've been working with over the years, and more recently Sajita Mathema as well. So that was all about how we need to actually treat children as subjects, not objects of research. We need to do research with children, respect them as participants in communities, in society, in their lives. They are the experts of their lives. This led on to work that we did with academics, practitioners, from global contexts in a book called Stepping Forward, Children and Young People's Participation in the Development Process. And here I really want to also remember people that have really inspired me in my work in child rights. Judith Enyu, Joe Boyden, Roger Hart, Andy West, an honour that you're here and we're still working together, Jill Gordon, Louise Chwala, so many more. So all of this work built on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1989 that talked about the protection, the provision of services, and the participation of children. And that's where a lot of my work in academia stems from. So that's the second strand of my work. Now, I haven't come straight into academia. So in 1998, and I would just say 1995, listening to smaller voices, 98, stepping forward. I happen to actually have my two boys here who were also born in those years. So somehow I have to produce books as I produce children. So they are also so welcome. So I set up a non-profit organisation called Development Focus with Dr. Robert Newrick, my then partner, and we worked on international issues of social justice, public participation, and children and young people's rights. So we continued the work on child rights, for example, in Save the Children's contribution to the UN study on violence, working across global contexts, with children in conflict with the law. We also did a piece of work called Rights Through Evaluation, supported by the UK Overseas Development, DFID at the time, now FCDO, worked with Save the Children in Vietnam, with Plan International in Indonesia. But at the same time, we developed a methodology, which is something I want to talk about here, because we're finding it very useful now across the Highlands and internationally. It's called Community Assessment and Action, and we started it off by being asked, press the wrong thing. I've pressed something. That's okay. So we started off being asked to trial creative methods from the global south in the global north by Oxfam UK's Poverty Unit and by Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. We looked at food poverty in Brighton, Coventry and Leicester. We continued to work in 38 different processes of community assessment and action. And a key part of this is that we trained local teams of residents, service providers, supported by academics, to carry out their own research on issues which were important to them. So we did work like looking at territoriality in the East End of Glasgow. We looked at health inequalities in Crawley with the Primary Healthcare Trust. There are so many experiences, but led by people to produce action plans, to work with service providers and to change policy and practice. And that is what I am most focused on and most want to continue to do. So I'll move on. So what does that mean? It means actually co-constructing questions and methods with the teams from that place, in that context, taking into account the issues which are most important to them. It involves having safety and ethical frameworks, and we have to remember that this was before ethics boards at universities. So we had frameworks that kept participants safe and kept teams safe as well, and making sure that people's information was anonymised and that people had somewhere to debrief about issues which were distressing. We developed coding systems, and this actually means that creative methods and qualitative research can be combined with quantitative figures so that policymakers can actually analyse and have the numbers that they need to inform changes of policy. The coding varies by age, gender, housing, employment, issues that are important and identified by that team in that place at that time. Creative methods, what does that mean? It means that we can use more traditional qualitative interviewing, but we can also use, for example, mapping. We map food deserts in Coventry and Leicester at that time using cardboard boxes. In Ethiopia, we've done mapping of migration routes in northern Ethiopia. You can do food mood lines, rivers and roads of life, youth-led walks. There's a wealth of different tools that we can all use in these participatory processes. And many of these have been documented in a journal called Participatory Learning and Action, which was a peer-reviewed journal that really helped practitioners and academics to work together. It's now archived at IIED, and it was done in conjunction with the Institute of Development Studies. So different tools for working with different people. So in working on community development, we're talking about intergenerational work, understanding the dynamics between children and older people. So sometimes older people may want to sit and have a chat or have a phone call. You might use more drama and active techniques with younger people. But I've had a room of service providers and policymakers doing all kinds of role play and exciting methods and actually drawing their visions for the future. So connecting people to changing contexts. And this is an important theme that comes with me into academia. Being and becoming in partnership is so important to my work. So I would say that I have a relational and contextual ontology way of seeing the world. There are such incredible people and partners that I've worked with over the last 35 years in Africa, Asia, and Latin America with ActionAid, Save the Children, Plan International, and lastly with Child Hope, where I was Director of International Programs. I know there are some people from all of those organisations on the line, and I welcome you. Across Europe, the Americas and Australia, as well, and more recent academic partnerships. And I really believe this partnership work is important, and I'll explain why. So coming into academia, and this is a rather back of an envelope cartoon drawn by Andy West the other day, and it's me entering academia with a load of methods and research. So it was very late in my life. So actually in 2008, I came into academia, and I want to really thank my inspirational supervisor, Patrick Thomas, along with Nikki Stanley, who gave me the opportunity of doing a funded PhD. But coming in from a wealth of research and experience for over 20 years, working as a practitioner researcher, and I strongly believe that we still need to work across those boundaries. So other people that I need to pay tribute to at this point, people like Kay Tisdall in Edinburgh, Barry Percy Smith, Alan Prout, people who really valued the work of practitioner researchers and encouraged us to keep going. Professor Karen Wells, Nicola Ansell, who invited me, and I taught with them at Birkbeck and Brunel. In Goldsmiths, David Oswell. In the University of Brighton, Andrew Church, Sarah Bragg, Mark Erickson, who are coming as well. Marina Novelli, Jen Colwell, Patricia Castaneda, Francesca and her whole team of at the research office. You know, people behind the scenes who are supporting the bids, the monitoring of research. Mel, Helen here, who do that for me. The whole team is important, not just the academics doing the research. So I wanted to talk about the changescape. Can I just have a time check, please? Just I'll come back to you. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Great. So I wanted to talk about the changescape as one of my main theoretical contributions in academia. So this brings in this theme of revisiting. rebuilding, remembering. So I revisited programs that I'd worked with as a practitioner 10 years previously. The Himalayan Development Forum in Nepal, and sadly we lost Sabir, who led that organisation during COVID. Save the Children's Saying Power, where young people across the UK led their own programmes and at Development Focus, we worked as a team to evaluate that programme with young people. And the Croydon Children's Fund, for which I was an evaluator for 5 years. So we worked across global contexts. We revisited children and talked to them as older young people. He's in a village in Nepal, and Kath visited that village with me. Here's Krishna from the Himalayan Development Community Development Forum, and these young people are looking at pictures of themselves as younger children. This particular project, the young children had told us about the taps, which were too high to reach, but they were the ones responsible for collecting water. So they suggested, why don't you build steps so that we don't have to hang off the taps and get the water? HICADEF then actually put steps across their whole water programme, which was fantastic. So they really did listen to children. So the changescape, it's a socio-ecological, socio-cultural model building on Bronfman Gunner's later work and also Tudge. It places young people at the centre, but it recognises the importance of family, community, political, cultural, social, economic context, and the changing nature of that. In fact, I thought of the name, the changescape, while walking through the hills of Nepal, the landscape of change. It's also influenced by critical realism, so that offers mechanisms that turn actions into outcomes. So it's actually these mechanisms that I'm going to explain using some pictures. Agency and confidence of children and young people in the middle. Their ideas, identity, inclusion, innovation and inspiration. We really need to support young people to find new futures. We really need to listen. Creating spaces, this is in Kenya, but we need to create spaces which are comfortable, which are fun, but also which help young people to build confidence, but also help adults to listen. We need to create spaces for dialogue between generations. Using those creative methods, creative praxis, we need to cross over and understand those that have lower literacy, include different people. In the work we'd done previously, it was called Reaching the Parts. It was to create a more level playing field, to actually get into issues in a different way. Capacity building in research, and here not for children to get into research, although that is also important, but for teams internationally and for adults to actually learn to listen to children. Co-construction and collaboration. This is a fantastic project in the hills of Kaski, working on youth-led research. We worked across Kenya, Benin, Nicaragua and Nepal on sexual rights and reproductive health and rights. Here we learn a lot across global context. So a book that I've written with Andy West, we take examples from South Asia and Asia and across the UK, and we call it Going Beyond Voice, because it's about power dynamics as well as listening to smaller voices. How has the changescape been developed? So this first diagram, the green and red one, is International Planned Parenthood Federation. The picture that I just showed, the report called Love, Sexual Rights and Young People. And here they talk about child-friendly services as being mechanisms, building supportive communities, training service providers, all of these different actions, and this fed into their global policy over the next 10 years at that time. The one on the right is about how to find more nuanced mechanisms to include children and young people in participatory action research. And many of these are published in peer-reviewed academic journals, this one in Action Research. Just some more examples. I don't expect you to be able to see all of these, but just to give you a couple of examples, we used it in Ethiopia and Nepal on a programme of research on uncertainty. Danny Burns leading a project at IDS on child labour and modern slavery. This was an entry point to actually look at the mechanisms which could support those young labourers and slaves to be involved in that research and to also talk to the employers and different people in that context. And here, Ondoro, created with Tessa Lewin and the team at Rejuvenate, and I know you're online and it's fantastic to work with you. And Ondoro means endless spiral. And here you can see the nature of time has changed. And we can see children, youth, adults connected in their views and decisions, leading to actions. But you can also see the arrow coming in. We must be accountable to children too. So just a quick example from Ethiopia and Nepal, another ESRC, at this point, DFID funded programme from their joint programme on poverty alleviation across Ethiopia and Nepal, and wonderful teams led by Melissa Getu in Ethiopia with Milky and Ahmed, and led by Simon Tulada in Nepal with Shubhendra and Sabitra, and of course Sina working with myself and Andy West and also Andrew Church. This is our book here, and uncertainty as an adult, I find it very challenging actually. Been through a lot of uncertainty recently and in my life, and I find that young people have a different way of dealing with uncertainty. We use Bauman's theories to actually look at uncertainty as not just negative, but that we should also ask the questions in the local languages in a neutral way, so that we understood that in some cases, young people's certainty was poverty, was hard labour, and actually the uncertainty when they didn't know what was going to happen was actually exciting, but they wanted to be invited back in. How long do we have? Okay, lovely. So I'm going to skip through. It's large-scale qualitative research engaging 1,000 youth. We looked at youth definitions of marginalisation. So government definitions often include gender, ethnicity, location, but youth actually include their experiences of abuse, themselves living with disability, their particular situations at the time. And we used a really important theory from Carl Hansen and Olga Neuenhaus, living rights, which is how do we make paper rights a reality on the ground? How do we translate them into people's reality and move towards social justice? We created spaces for youth to influence policy with the Ministry for Now Women, Children and Youth in Ethiopia, and also in Nepal with the Maoist government, we held regional meetings with mayors, local representatives, and at a national level. The young people presenting their own issues and actually getting policymakers to sign documents of commitments, which they're going back to check. But the power of partnership, this partnership, ActionAid Nepal, again, amazing. They are creating youth hubs across Nepal now and really listening to young people. Chadet in Ethiopia, working with migrating girls. We held a conference, The Power of Partnership, which I was director of that conference for ESRC DFID at the time. Working with Goldsmiths, University of Brighton, Child Hope, and the national universities. It is so important to work in partnership. So finishing off, UHI, we are revisiting, remembering, rebuilding on all of that previous work with practitioners across global contexts and through academia. A couple of examples. Working with doctoral students on our recent visit to South Africa, we used some techniques which I've used with NGOs, you know, back in the 90s. So what's a good or a bad interview? And thank you so much to these guys at the bottom who actually really saved my life when I broke my shoulder out there 8 weeks ago. So thank you, Shadrach and Gray, and also Devani. Living on the edge of society in Nairobi, GCRF funding recently allowed us to follow the lives of 12 young people with Pendekaso Letu. Again, Akari, I know you're online, brilliant, fantastic work. It stemmed from youth-led work funded by the UN Girls Education Initiative with 100 street-connected girls and amazing social workers. These are young girls living on rubbish dumps who look after their parents with HIV. And Pendekaso Letu helped them to enter education and to for their parents to actually have businesses, small businesses, which is incredible. But who's funding these organisations now? GCRF is cut. Overseas development aid is cut. We need to actually do something about this. Briefly, changescapes of COVID recovery, a perfect storm, working with the Institute of Northern Studies, the Centre for Mountain Studies, the Centre for Recreation and Tourism Research and ERI across the partnership. And here we looked at the hardest hit across the Highlands and how they had experienced COVID and how they would see recovery. In Inverness, the hardest hit were missing face-to-face services, increasing mental health problems, and lost education. Across remote communities, similar issues in Caithness, in fact. But across remote communities, some connection is lost, and also the tourism industry, which is so important to the Highlands. But basically, there were some positive aspects as well, people starting to rebuild community. A final project before I end. So a little bit different, the socio-cultural perceptions of beavers, led by Bernd Hammerfling. But I need to bring it in because it brings us back to where I started, nature and people. How do we live with nature? There are very different views about beavers across the Highlands. We're talking about conservation translocation. And here we use community assessment and action, and we had community conversations where people came in and really had a lot of disagreement with each other. I remember Bernd saying, I'm glad you were doing that conversation bit. And people really had legitimate concerns. People need to be heard, and then the actions discussed with them. And this report will be on Nature Scott's website shortly. Our work continues on youth-centred, intergenerational, community-driven research with Rejuvenate, but also across our work at the Centre for Living Sustainability. And we're working with the College Development Network. And there's amazing work being done in this college and other colleges across the partnership on poverty. We give free breakfasts, lunches, warm hubs, free clothes. The cost of living is hitting hard, a perfect storm after COVID and Brexit. We have a lot to do. I don't have much time for this, but I wanted to bring in my mother, who was a child in the war, and recently I interviewed her and fed back her perspectives to a fantastic memorial for Berry Mail, an incredible professor in our field, who was in our first Stepping Forward book. She talked about looking after the pigs, and she talked about her daily life. And Berry Mail's written a book about children's contributions to the war. And there's my granddad, my own inspiration, along with his wife, Iris Lionel Robbins, who luckily got injured in the war. So he went back to study economics and ran the LSE and wrote the Robbins Report, which is a really important for all of us here at universities. Very inspirational. Continue to be inspired by young people. This is from Saying Power, 2000. They were evaluating their own youth-led projects with other young people across the UK. Incredible attention to detail, incredible inspiration. So can we be activists and academics? I would finally say yes. This is in Nairn, a procession with fantastic silk scarves by Pretty, and the procession was to coincide with COP26 in Glasgow, and we walked down the high street in Nairn. And I think you can be an activist, but you obviously continue your research at the same time. And the most important thing about UHI is that it is actually a very impactful university, really appreciates applied research and innovation. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, Vicky, thank you so much for your lecture. Well, there may be some questions. Thank you so much for your lecture this evening. That was just fantastic. And I mean, you combine something which is incredibly professional, but at the same time deeply personal and absolutely moving. So we could see that, couldn't we? You know, Vicky's life, Vicky as a person, Vicky as a professional, Vicky's values coming together in what we've just seen. And there were two things that I'd like to pick out that struck a chord with me particularly. First of all, this theme of impact. And I think we can see in the lecture today that at each stage of your professional career, and indeed before your academic career and for your academic career, our impact is so important. And I was struck, for example, about when you talk about the youth hubs in Nepal, a direct outcome, a direct impact from your research. And I suppose what's most inspiring to me is that the impact is all about folks who may be underrepresented in society, you know, giving children voice, giving marginalised people voice. And I know that that is not, coming back to the personal professional thing, that is not just a professional obligation, that is a deep-seated personal value. And frankly, that just shone through in this evening lecture. And the second thing that jumped out for me was I've written down my notes here, was global. So in Vicky's work, I mean, the energy behind your work is just incredible over such a long period of time. And I think we see that every day at UHI. The energy behind Vicky's work has led to, you know, that global impact. And that is just phenomenal. And I take my hat off to you. I'm sure we all do. You should be immensely proud of the impact of your work over such a long period of time in the global context. So yeah, inspirational drives, you know, major processes of critical reflection in my mind, and I'm sure others as well. And I think from a UHI perspective, I mean, UHI, I was actually saying to somebody else who had a visitor today, I was saying to somebody else, UHI, for me, I've been here for 14 years, it's by far the best part of my career. It is a fantastic university institution, complex and challenging though it is, but we are having impact in our communities up and down the Highlands and Islands and beyond. And Vicky, for you to join us, I think your values, and you made similar comments about UHI, I think your values and your work really aligns with what we're trying to do as a university. So it's one of the real pleasures and privileges of my career at this time to have the fortune of working with you in UHI and all the things that we're doing together. So inspirational and moving, but yeah, deeply grateful for your lecture. And we do have some time for some questions. Now, I think online questions, the comms folks are going to read out. So for folks online, oh, there's Jess. I think, have you got questions, Jess, already, or?
I don't have any questions, Neil, but I just...
There.
Oh, hold on a second.
We can now.
Yep. There's no questions, but lots of lovely praise, and the word inspiration has appeared many times. And also from Sarah Jackson, she said, "Thank you so much for all that you've done to put young people and their voices at the heart of all you do." So just lots and lots of lovely praise on the chat, and I just wanted to share that. But thank you.
Thanks, Jess. And if there are questions, just interrupt. Questions from the floor here, please. If there are questions, thank you. Bernd, yeah. Bernd's going to start us off.
Well, first, thank you for your really inspirational presentation, Vicky. But also thank you for mentioning beavers. Also, thank you for opening my eyes to the importance of social science. Really, the scientists, we often look down on social scientists a little bit. But after working for a year with you, I really get it now. So thank you. But the question I have is, what are the most exciting and important questions for you in the future?
I think one of the most important questions is how we address inequality. It is growing, it is endemic. We have to address it with COVID, Brexit. It's the cost of living crisis. You know, in this country, on our doorsteps, there are people that can't eat, that are using food banks. You know, across the world, we've got international development aid being cut. We've got research internationally being cut, especially on poverty. I think that's absolutely critical. On a more positive note, the Sustainable Development Goals, I think, are a really good framework. 17 goals. What we need to do, in a similar way to living rights, making rights a reality on the ground. We need to make sustainability goals living. We need to actually bring them into our everyday lives, living underwater, living on land, you know, women's rights, education, hunger. We need to address all of those goals, peace and justice, but across international boundaries. And I think it's important to work in a transdisciplinary way. So we're really working across disciplines, and it's a real pleasure to work with the Institute as well as with all our people across the centre. But we need to work with people outside academia too, who are keen to address place-based, value-driven community development research. We need to do that again. We did it in the 90s, the 2000s. We've had changes of governments and changes of values. We need to do it again. We need to remember.
Thank you, Vicky. Further questions? Oh, there's a mic.
Thank you. That I'm supposed to hold it. Lovely to hear more about your work, Vicky. I just wondered, because obviously you're a practitioner for a long time before you became an academic, and whether you see that as a positive way into academia, or do you think it's meant you've been able to have more impact or more focused on impact?
That's a really interesting question. I wondered whether to. So I think a lot of my academic work is very strongly based in the partnerships that were formed when I was a practitioner, working on the ground, working across global contexts, and now with long-standing, trusted people and partners across global contexts. You know, there are people that I've been working with for 30 years in ActionAid, in this room, across the globe, and I've brought those into an academic context. Now, coming into academia, I would say that's quite challenging as a practitioner, and there are academics who fully welcome your previous experience, and others that feel you should really go through the academic course and start from scratch. So you're a bit like Marmite, I think. People love you or hate you, and perhaps I am anyway, a bit like Marmite. So yeah, it has its benefits and not. I think one thing I would say, it's very hard for practitioners now because you really need ethics to get things published. It's not a level playing field, and so we have to reach out with open arms to have partnership with amazing third sector organisations that really have access to the most marginalised people, and really work in partnership, but real partnership, to respect them as equal partners.
Thank you, Vicky. I think we might have a question online, I think, yeah. And we've perhaps got time for a couple more, and then we'll move on. But yes, over to you.
No, that's fine. We've got 3 questions. So the first question is from David Oswell. Vicky, could you describe one of your many memorable research encounters with young people that really made you stop and rethink your ideas?
Yes. I'm going to take an example from the recent Your World research, youth uncertainty rights research. So in Nepal, young people helping their families rebuild after the earthquake. Many houses were destroyed, and young people saw that they could no longer follow the social norms and the expectations that they had previously tried their very hardest to meet. So they travelled to Kathmandu and they started to make candlesticks out of silver, and they saved up enough money to return to their families and rebuild their houses. And what we found across Ethiopia and Nepal was that a lot of the young people, while needing to migrate, needing to go to other countries, sometimes to very difficult situations across the Middle East, they actually always wanted to return and be welcomed back and feel a sense of belonging. And they wanted to help their parents, however hard their lives were, and however hard it was to meet their expectations. They really wanted to be accepted back into their communities of origin. And that's very inspiring. I found their whole attitude across that project just extraordinary.
Thank you. Jess?
Fantastic, thank you. We have a question from Professor Donna Hiddle, and she says, thank you for a great lecture, Vicky. I am wondering how crucial the research process you feel enabling young people to direct their own projects is.
Yeah, I think it's really important to support children and young people to initiate projects and research. So what are the research questions? What is most important to them? But what I don't think we should do is always presume that they always want to lead the research. Sometimes they just want to have a good time. And actually, you do the research and we'll tell you what we think. So I think there should be the flexibility to support children and young people who really want to lead research, and they are so capable of doing that. We've done work with the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, Andy, Jen Colwell, different people who are sitting here, and involving 5 to 8-year-olds in research, and actually some really young children leading their own research. It's incredible. I think we should try to facilitate youth to really lead programs where they wish to, because their ideas are very different to ours. We have a lot of adultism, which is the last ism, because we were all children once. We were all children, so every one of us think we know what children want and need. But we were children in different times, in different places. And we really need to listen to them, because they do things in different ways. It's absolutely amazing. They have skills we can never achieve. I know that.
Thank you. And we have one final question online, and then perhaps time for one more question in the room, and then we better move on, I think. But Jess, the third question.
A question from Susan Samborski-Welsh, and the question is, what has been the most memorable moment in your career so far?
Easy question.
This. I think I particularly want to say this because we have swimmers from northern shores, looking north, looking south. We have people that I've grown up with, that I've been at school with, at college with. I have people that I've worked with from third sector organisations over 30 years ago here. And I've somehow landed in the University of the Highlands and Islands. It wasn't really a plan. It wasn't one of those things where I had this vision to come to the Highlands, and many people do. I somehow ended up here at an interview that I found so inspirational. And there was a rainbow over Inverness. And I said, yes, I'll come. And I did, and I found it inspirational ever since. And I have the most fantastic colleagues across the whole partnership.
Thank you, Vicky. A couple of other hands went up. There's one final question, perhaps, from me towards the back, and then we will move along, I think.
It's not really a question. I just want. I'm
Phew.
Yeah. So I'm Vicky's oldest friend. I've known her for 60 years, all our life, darling. And I just wanted
That
to
gives
say,
it away, Leo.
this has been a fantastic occasion for me, and I think for some other people here, because it's married up what I know about Vicky personally, which is a lot, and what I know about her professionally, which isn't that much, it turns out. And I just wanted to say I'm so proud of you. And I think Vicky hasn't blown her own trumpet enough, and it's really a personal version of what your colleague was saying, which is as an intimate link between who you are and the work you've done. And the positive, brilliant, energetic, warm person that you are shines through every bit of the work you've done. I think incredible achievements.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, colleagues and friends, for all of your questions and points and observations. And it's wonderful to see the accolades there on the screen. I should have mentioned right at the beginning, I'm Neil Simcoe. I'm Deputy Principal for Research and Academic at the University of the Highlands and Islands. And as I say, it's been a huge privilege to get to know you, Vicky, and to work with you. And your impact is there. We're just going through academic restructuring. Vicky's impact there is, for the first time, we've got the word social sciences appearing in our new academic structure. So there's another impact. But before I just hand over to my colleague, I'll bring Michael Rayner in a second. I think the word that's going through my mind actually is authentic, because that's, I think, Vicky's oldest friend there, this bringing together of the personal and the professional. It's the authenticity of it that shines through, and that is so inspirational and powerful, and yeah, it's really thought-provoking. So thank you once again for everything.
Thank you.
Now my further privilege to hand over to Michael Rayner, who's our Dean of Research and Knowledge Exchange at the University of the Highlands and Islands, who will welcome Vicky formally into the professoriate at UHI.
Thanks very much for that, Neil. You're nearly there. Not quite, not long to go, hopefully. But there's a little formal bit that we need to do just now, just to put the final stamp on this translation into the professoriate. And so I want to ask you all a question to start with. If I were to ask you to conjure up in your mind an image to go along with the term professor, I wonder what that would be. Now, in the past, I guess there's a stereotyped and caricatured sort of image that might well have emerged, perhaps slightly eccentric looking, a bespectacled boffin, perhaps with their head stuck in a book and also stuck up in some ivory tower somewhere detached from reality. Hopefully, as you've seen tonight, this is far from the truth in modern day academia. Today, research is focused on very practical and relevant issues that face society. It's often very hands-on and seeks to deliver a range of useful solutions to help folk in their everyday lives. And that's to the benefit of society at large. Now, Vicky Johnson, as we've heard and as we know, is an expert in this sort of engagement. She demonstrates genuine academic concern, social awareness, and knows well the excellence and usefulness of her research and the benefits of that to the academy and to society at large. Indeed, as we've heard in the lecture this evening, her research has had and continues to have real and significant value in a broad range of public, social, and international contexts. Indeed, I had the pleasure, you've heard about this, of going with Vicky recently, together with several other colleagues, to visit South Africa, where we have a programme of activities with the University of Venda and the University of the Free State. In that visit, Vicky's enthusiasm, curiosity about all manner of different things, excellence in teaching and interpersonal engagement and relationships, and joy of learning and enabling others to learn and grow were evident at all levels. And her colleagues and the students we were meeting with were really impressed and hugely grateful that she was one of the party that went across to visit them from UHI. So why am I telling you this? Well, the title professor is given only to highly accomplished and recognised academics. In fact, it's regarded in the UK and across the globe as being the highest rank in academia that one can achieve. As such, recognition to hold the title is not something that is given away lightly, and Vicky richly deserves the title. So what do professors do? Well, normally they hold advanced degrees, often in research, and typically, but not always at the doctoral level. They'll often provide leadership and management of their subject areas, conduct advanced research, much of which will be published, as we've heard, and they'll supervise and mentor postgraduate students and more junior staff, all with a view to encouraging the joy of learning. As if that's not enough, they also act as ambassadors for their institutions. And Vicky has represented UHI Inverness and the university more generally in a wide variety of ways and places, both at home and overseas. Now, Vicky might not have been at UHI for terribly long, but her impact here has been significant and wide-ranging, and her academic and research excellence has been recognised likewise, both within and out with the university. She has genuinely been, as we've heard testimony to all night, an inspirational and aspirational role model for progressing academics and peers at all levels. Being awarded the title professor is one of the most important moments in the career of an academic, and holders of the title can feel duly proud and also humbled at the same time. Now, the University of the Highlands and Islands is in its second decade, which makes it quite young by the standards of some of the institutions, of course, in the UK. However, the quality of our research, learning and teaching, public engagement and leadership reflect a maturity far beyond our relatively young age. We have approximately 50 members of the UHI Professoriate, specialising in subjects including diabetes research, northern studies, archaeology, history, digital health, marine science, and so much more. We're now delighted to add Vicky Johnson to that number. And it's my pleasure on behalf of the UHI Professoriate to welcome you into the fold. So please, could you join me in welcoming to the Professoriate of the University of the Highlands and Islands, Professor Vicky Johnson. Just so that you can remember this ordeal and an enjoyable occasion it's been through tonight. So well done. Yes. Well, Vicky's now going to take that out and have a wee look. Thank you. It's really cute.
I would like to ask everybody who's here tonight, sadly, of course, you can't join us online, but there is tea and coffee outside if you'd like to stay and just share a wee cup and a few chances to chat together, then please, that'll be out in the reception area outside. I've also been asked, just before we do finish up, to say that for those folk who'll be heading to Nairn and that you happen to have spaces in your cars, could you please just hang back a little bit and wait at the end and make yourselves known if you could to Vicky, so that I guess transport for others can be arranged. But as far as everything is concerned, that's us at the end of proceedings, and you are now a full member of the professoriate. Well done. Thank you.